Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to be covering the topic of COVID and its impacts on E&S field assignment work, or assessment work, adapting to current conditions such as travel restrictions, local capacity, technologies, and new processes, and planning for the future in that post-COVID world and how efforts will continue. My name is Tanya Frazier from IAI headquarters, and I will be your moderator. Today's webinar is co-hosted by the IAIA, or International Association for Impact Assessment, and the IAIA's Washington Area Branch, or WAB. IAIA is the leading global network on best practice for using impact assessment to make informed decisions. I invite you, as you are watching today's webinar, if you are feeling inspired, want to do a shout out about what you're learning, or the excitement of the opportunity to have access to free webinars, go ahead and shout out on social media. We have hashtags available for hashtag IAI webinar, as well as at IAIA network, regardless of which of your social media platforms that you are using. Oh, one moment. All right, sorry about that. Back to the slide. Oops, next slide. So we have a series of webinars that are available. There are now dozens and dozens of webinars that are historically archived on the IAI website, and they are part of this very wide breadth of topics. A few of the older topics that I wanted to kind of resurrect just for your awareness. We have topics on gender, emerging technologies, biodiversity, and there genuinely are topics on all kinds of different topics as it regards to the many facets of impact assessment. So please take some time during the days to come to go ahead and take a peek at what is available for you in on-demand form. Also, there are opportunities for you to have additional learning opportunities. One program that we have is called the Professional Development Program. Currently, there is a course that just began called the Foundations of Impact Assessment. It is an online training program that runs for 12 weeks, and it has a mentorship and training component with a one-on-one specialized trainer and expert in the field. We are excited to announce that we are in development of a SIA and a involuntary resettlement course that will be added to that menu over the next 12 months. So be watching for that exciting technological growth and opportunities for more professional development. Also, we have some exciting events coming up, most exciting being our May virtual IAI 21 annual conference. We will not be in Seville, but we will be on a glorious platform online with wonderful opportunities for both accessing knowledge and wisdom and the ability to have some social connection in an interactive online manner. So please trust that we have really upgraded our game in the platform investment to make it so that you can feel more in person and connected with one another. Next, we do also have a new series of online events that are going to be the online training courses. Usually at our annual conferences, there are training courses that happen before the event, the couple of days before. And because that isn't conducive to an online event being so many days long. Instead, we'll be having these online training courses being offered throughout the year. So watch for that in the upcoming e-news. We hope to begin those in the next month or two. And wow, do we have a wonderful lineup of presentations for you, variety of presenters as well as topics. Finally, the IAI website is just a wealth of knowledge and resources that are accessible to you in multiple languages. So we have free downloadable publications like best practice principles, the IAA fast tips, and many others. So feel free to explore. Take a look at the website and see what new treasures you can find today. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First of all, people will always ask, is this being recorded? The answer is yes. We are going to be recording it. We currently are recording this session. It will be sent out via email, a link to the website that houses this recording, as well as all of the handouts that are associated with this recording will also be hosted there. So within 48 hours, you will get an email with all of those details. And if you have a colleague who wasn't able to be here, but did register, please let them know it's coming and they don't have to ask me, it's already on its way. If you have questions during the presentation, either technical questions or questions for the presenter, the opportunity is there for you to enter them into the questions panel, which is one of the options in the control panel on the right. There is a hand raising function that is activated for this particular webinar, but ladies and gentlemen, we have almost 1,000, just under 1,000 registrants for this participation, and we will probably be at 500 participants during the presentation, so we aren't going to be using the hand raising function. Please use the questions section instead. Last but certainly not least, at the end of the presentation, there will be a survey that's going to just automatically pop up after the presentation is over. Please take a couple of brief moments to give us your feedback. It truly is valuable, and we do use that information for future planning. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton to my colleague in this wonderful work, Charles Kelly, who goes by Kelly. He is going to be setting the stage today for today's event by sharing some brief summaries of the recent IAI study called the COVID-19 and Impact Assessment. Kelly was the chair and the lead of that committee and has just been very passionate about making sure that we are harnessing information during this time of rapid change. And I am delighted for you to be able to meet him. So I am going to pass the virtual baton to him. Just one moment. All right, Kelly, have fun.
Oh, got to turn on my microphone. That's always important. Good. So what I'll talk about very briefly is the results of the survey that we've done twice so far. One thing I want to note as we start, as of yesterday from the Johns Hopkins website, there are about 105 million people confirmed cases globally and 2.3 million fatalities. This is obviously a global disaster. Important to note that the whole idea of a quarantine is actually a 600-year-old response, basically to keep the sick people away from the not sick people. And this has resulted in the physical distancing that we've been experiencing for the last year and has major impact on our works, how we socialize and how we may manage our daily life. The survey, this is a little bit of background information, 2 rounds, one in May and the other in July and August 2020. I'll speak about the second survey a little bit, some snapshots from that, and the details are available at the links there, and this presentation will be shared, so if you want to find out more, please go to those links. Obviously, one of the most significant impacts of COVID-19 and the quarantine process and the social distancing is the need for people to stop traveling, basically. And so here we have some results. We see the travel restrictions reported by 20% of the respondents to be affecting how they do work. And also about 40% of the respondents indicated that they continue to work, but work remotely. And I think that's a significant point that we'll be discussing a little bit later over the fact that how our work is affected by not being able to physically travel and contact people. One aspect I wanted to highlight is that the pandemic has affected people as individuals personally. It's not a distant problem, it's a very close problem. And one of the significant outcomes of this element of the survey was a large number of people who expressed some concern about feeling a sense of uncertainty, feeling a sense of uncertainty, social isolation, professional isolation, things like that. I think this is important to understand the context in which we're asking people to continue to work through the pandemic. Now, when we look at responses in terms of the question of positive impacts, we do note that about 30% of the respondents said it gave them the opportunity to develop new and better ways or more efficient ways of conducting their work. So the pandemic has had a negative impact, very clear about that, but also we recognize both personal positive impacts, but also professional positive impacts. One of the most significant findings, I guess, is that as respondents moved from dealing with the pandemic to dealing with pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, is the significant increase of reported use of electronic means of communication, if there's no other way of saying that. So public meetings via video conferencing, using online surveys, gathering input via social media. These are all, according to the survey, increased dramatically from before. So in summary, one of the most significant outcomes of the second survey, and somewhat reflected in the first survey, is the reliance on electronic communications, but the risk that's been identified across the different sectors that are involved in field consultations with people affected by change, is that those on the other side of the digital divide may be excluded, and that may impact the results of the survey and field assessment work. A second issue that came out of the survey is whether the impact assessment rules and regulations are changing, and whether those changes will be temporary or whether we're looking at permanent changes as to the way that things are being done in terms of impact assessment. And then also important to recognize at a personal level, but also at a professional level, and when working with others, that the pandemic is associated with a number of stress indicators. And this is a matter of concern as we're asking people to work differently and often in ways that are much more stressful than previously, and how that affects both how they do their work and the results that they're coming up with. So this has been a very brief overview of the second survey. The details are available at the two links on this slide, or you can contact me at havedisastercallkelly@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly, so much for your contributions. And as Kelly mentioned, those will be made available for you to access, and they are actually momentarily available for you to access. If you go to the control panel, down to the handout section, you're able to print out each of those handouts that will be offered. So if you are a person who needs to follow along while we go, everything is available for you. We're next going to transition to Dr. Ariel Kirschner, and he is going to be taking us into an introduction of our panel. Ariel is the co-chair of the Washington area branch. He also serves as an executive ESG and sustainability advisor at GHD, which is an engineering and advisory consulting firm, as well as being the president of the AMDA Consultants. He has helped to co-coordinate this amazing panel, and I am honored to pass the microphone on to him. Here we go, Ariel, have fun.
Thank you, Tanya. And first of all, thank you to all the participants for joining us today. My understanding is that we have almost 1,000 registered participants from more than 40 countries. It's a great response and indicative of the high interest on this topic. We are very lucky to have with us today such a distinguished group of panelists to address and share their experiences on this important topic. These panelists include Maria Esteves. Maria is the director of a Community Insights Group, a social impact management consultancy. She is also the past president of IAIA and has worked globally particularly on how resource-affected communities and regions can benefit from the presence of energy and extractive projects. Also with us today, we have Mr. Anton van Outeren. Anton is a Senior Environmental and Social Officer at FMO, the Netherlands Development Financing Company. Anton has been implemented FMO sustainability policies both internally and with clients worldwide, although his current focus is Latin America. He has also contributed to the refinement of FMO's internal sustainability management systems. Also with us is Elizabeth Turk. Elizabeth is a Chartered Environmental and Social Advisor at Vision, with experience providing project management, lenders, advisory services, environmental and social due diligence, and impact assessment for a wide range of sectors, but specializing in the fields of energy transition, generation and distribution, downstream, upstream, and infrastructure. We're also very lucky to have with us today Gabriel Todd de Acevedo. Gabriel has worked with development projects in some 40 countries over 30 years. He's currently the Chief ESG Division at IDB Invest, the Inter-American Development Bank. He held senior positions at the World Bank, the World Life Fund for Conservation, and in the private sector. In 2016, Gabriel joined IDB Invest as the division chief of the Environmental and Social Corporate Governance Division, and he has been a board member with the Brazilian Biodiversity Fund, FUNBio, and with the Brazilian Water Resources Association. One additional panelist is Ms. Sinabu Ba. She is the founder and CEO of ESG Africa, a senior advisor with 23 years of experience in sustainability and ESG risk management. Sinabu was the ESG manager for IFC Sub-Saharan Africa region from 2014 to 2018, where she led the organization's effort to promote sustainability private sector investment. She's a social specialist undertaking E&S due diligence in all sectors: energy, agribusinesses, manufacturing, oil and gas, and mining, transport, and services. Back to you, Tanya.
All right, thank you, sir. Well, we are going to transition into our first poll of the day. Attendees, you may not know that this is an interactive presentation. And so I'm going to launch a question. I'd like you to ponder the question and then take a moment to make a selection of one of the choices that are available to you. So here is the launch. All right, it says it's distributing the poll. Let me just double check that you are able to see that. Because we as presenters do not get the luxury of seeing everything that you see. All right, it looks like it's there. So let me read that for you. The first question is this. You are asked by a consultant to perform a remote due diligence on a project covering both environmental and social standards. So, do you say option A, yes, and added a limitation to your report that the work was desktop? Secondly, do you say yes to the environmental component and no to the social component? Next, do you say yes and work with the local specialist that visits the site? Or do you say none of the above? So let's collect the panel or the attendee responses. We'll do about 5 more seconds of collection. And then we will manage the poll. Perfect, thank you. Right, and as it's trying to do that, it is not listening to me. So I'm going to close the poll this way. There we go. So you don't need to see that. Let's go back to a different view of the screen. One moment, the joy of technical difficulties. All right. Let's go back to main screen. Let me X out of this and see if that solves my problem. So let's look at what the results say in that poll. Sorry about those technical challenges there, folks. Let's share those results. We have, because the panelists are not able to see the answers here, I'm going to just read them aloud. 21% of our respondents said yes, that we would add a limitation to the report and that we would announce that the work was desktop. 3% said yes to the environmental component, but no to the social component. And a whopping 68% said yes, and to work with the local specialists that visit that site. Finally, 8% said none of the above. Wonderful. And that is the end of panel poll number 1. So at this juncture, I would like to transition to introducing our next presenter. I am going to share the ability for him to become the presenter. There's so many moving pieces in this presentation today. All right, and as he has already been introduced, our presentation will be given by Anton. He is ready to go, and I will mute and pass the baton to him. Have fun, Anton.
Does this work?
Looks great.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. My presentation is mentioned setting the state, the FMO perspective on the topic of this webinar. First, I give a briefest introduction of FMO, the Dutch Development Bank for short. We finance private companies in developing countries in the fields of agribusiness, food and water, in the energy, mostly on the renewable energy, of course, and financial institutions, and we have a Dutch business department. What I would like to do is first give a very quick impression of how our financing process works, not different from many other banks. So we start with client selection and maybe a more thorough screening. Then we do the due diligence to see in more detail how the client is doing. We come up with a decision whether we want to invest yes or no. That goes on to contracting, then the disbursement of the monies, and in the end, the monitoring up till the repayment of the loans. Now in FMO, we have incorporated the environmental and social risk management actually in every step. And I think I go walk through you that in the client selection, we review at the environmental social policies of the clients. Further screening, we look for information like environmental social impact assessment, environmental social management plans, and so forth. One important aspect here is already for us to see whether this impact assessment is like a local impact assessment according to local regulations, or an impact assessment more conform international standards like IFC performance standards. In the due diligence step, we usually have a consultant review, and that results in a gap analysis of how the client is doing or the project compared basically to the IFC performance standards. That comes up to in our financing proposal up for decision, and it gets an internal review, including the environmental and social work in the proposal. So it's kind of a check of my work in the process. Then up to contracting, we make sure that there is sufficient environmental social clauses in the contract, including usually the environmental social action plan that is the result of the gap analysis. In the disbursement, there might be ENS conditions for disbursement, and in the monitoring, we follow up how the client is doing in terms of environmental social compliance with the conditions, how the environmental social action plan is implemented, and also especially on the higher risk project, we have regular environmental and social monitoring visit, either by myself or by a consultant. I should say in the past time, we had regular ENS visit. Now, of course, it is a bit different, and to make it a little bit more strict, we have come up with internal guidelines of how to go about this process in the current COVID situation. So yes, we have travel restrictions, and the guidelines that we've set for ourselves say, well, we can focus, we can try to carry out virtual due diligence, but in the end, we should not compromise on how much information you have, that we have sufficient insight to make a responsible investment decision. We can rely on trusted partners, and we did that already, but probably we are doing that even more. I think what I see is that we do more in-depth background checks and paper checks. And in that sense, existing clients, of course, are a bit easier to go on in this time with restrictions than to embark with new clients. I think that's an important finding for now. Of course, we have to rely even more on consultants instead of our own visit. And yeah, as it turns out, local consultants, as also shown in the poll, play an important role here. What we would ideally look for is that local consultants still would be associated with those international consultancy firms on the quality control and on the consistency, and on the actual experience in doing this type of work for banks like us with the IFC performance standard as a benchmark. And we've also determined that we have some no-goes that, especially for the higher risk situations, we would feel not comfortable by relying just on this approach, so that we would not go ahead without a visit if there is conflict context or labor conflicts, human rights abuses, large resettlements, and PS7 indigenous people triggered. In addition to that, we have harmonized this approach with the EDFIs, the European Development Finance Institutions. That's like the sister organizations of FMO across Europe. But I understand there's not the no-go list. My personal experience with, say, the clients and projects in Latin America, which I have visited together with Ariel just before we had those lockdown, is, yeah, mainly we see delays related to the equipment imports, delay in the arrival of technical specialists, which might need to do testing or commissioning. So this is the practical impact of COVID on our projects. Then, as said, the reliance on local consultants, we see the necessity to reinforce the local capacity. ETFI has come up with is working on a concept note to structurally develop that. Other parties as well, and it will be a topic later on in this webinar as well. I know, for instance, there's the Netherlands Commission of Environmental Assessment is working in West Africa to get IFC performance standards implemented there in the legislation of the countries, and associated training for local consultants. And maybe there is some room for coordination, because I think there is many initiatives focused on this going around. Lastly, what we did for clients struggling with the impacts of COVID, we developed a number of capacity development projects, also webinars to share good practices. We developed COVID-19 guidance for clients and address practical things like retrenchments and job protection, how our clients should go best around that. And we have projects where we support health and safety protection materials, support to communities. Practically, was one project monitoring I could not visit, but I got some lovely drone footage from the consultant, and I would like to share how that looks like. It's from a wind project in Nicaragua, from the Inkia Energy company, and the footage is from Terra Consultant. See if I can start it. Here you are. Well, I have never visited this project, but now I already get a very good overview, literally, of the project. And I think what you saw, this possibility to add notifications on what we see and where we are, for me, that is very helpful. I can get a view on where is the agricultural land and ask questions. Did you interview the neighboring farmer? And it also helps me to set the actual situation within the maps and pictures that they have, and where the rivers are, and how the windmills are placed. And with that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anton, for your help. I will now invite you to pass the virtual torch over to our next presenters. We're going to have a contribution of reflection and conversation from both, I just need to pull up that correct page. Sorry, one moment. From both Gabriel and from Gabriel and Liz, pardon me. So Gabriel and Liz are going to turn on their microphones and their cameras. Anton, thank you so much, and we are set to go. Have fun conversing around your feedback.
Thank you, Anton, for the presentation. That was a very interesting discussion on how the sort of FMO have approached virtual site visits and the standards that have been set by your bank for, I guess, consultants who might be doing those site visits. I think, Gabrielle, would you like to share with us some of your experiences about how virtual site visits have evolved over the year and the new techniques that you've incorporated?
Sure. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Anton, for the presentation, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to all of those that are participating in this webinar around the globe. I lead the ESG department at the private arm of the IDB group. We're called IDB Invest, so we are the part of the IDB group that work with the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I just want to share some of the lessons that and some of the learning that has taken place in our bank with this type of work, which in many ways are similar to what Anton has explained. There are certain differences regarding the characteristics of our regional presence. which are important to highlight. But in general, just very quickly in terms of the lessons list. First, we've learned that we're able to do a lot more than what we anticipated. So we are not able to do everything, but we're able to do a lot more. But that required also adaptation on our side, both in terms of tools and in terms of processes, internal process. And I think Anton has mentioned some of them. And what we found out is that in spite of our large experience, we were falling behind in terms of use of some technological tools that have played a greater role. Anton has mentioned the drones. We're using drones a lot, but we are using a lot more of satellite imagery, live cams that have been installed in our projects. We have also subscribed to a number of databases that allow us to do levels of screening like rep risks and others. So the collective use of these technologies has helped a lot, and also the use in our of new processes internally. So first lessons, we were able not to do everything, but we're able to do a lot more than we anticipated at the outset. Second lessons is that communities and local stakeholders are a lot more connected than what we think. No, obviously digital inclusion is still a challenge in Latin America and the Caribbean, but what we found out is that communities are a lot more connected than we think. The trick there was for us to adapt to what methodologies and tools they were using, and not to impose our own, not to impose, for instance, we use Microsoft Teams, not to impose Microsoft Teams. But if you open up and discuss with these local stakeholders, what is they're using, like WhatsApp, for instance, is a big one. You can do a lot of, if we will, virtual face-to-face. So we need to adjust internally. We need to adjust to what communities are doing. The whole series of issues related to the social risks have by far been the most challenging to do remotely. So we've learned a lot in that aspect in terms of virtual consultation, virtual follow-up, and we've issued guidance recently that we can share. They're open to the public, both on COVID for infrastructure, agribusiness, for corporate governance, but also, for instance, on what we've learned on virtual consultation. So I'm not going to go into that, but we have a guidance online that we'll be glad to share. I mentioned some differences with Anton in terms of the characteristics. We have similar institutions, we lend to the private sector, but we have field presence. And I think that's a decision. First, the IDB group is present in all the countries that we operate in the Caribbean and in Latin America. So we have a representative, there are IDB group staff, but also 4 years ago, we took the decision of increasing our own ESG field presence. So today I have 12 our staff, full-time staff in the field in 6 countries. We have people, for instance, present in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Jamaica, Panama, from our own team, and that decision to increase our field presence proved very useful during the COVID, but we are also relying a lot more on local consultants. And again, I think being driven to do something out of our comfort zone and not simply look at the big international firms, but being more proactive, we found some jewels in many of the countries, people that had experience. And what the shift has been is that we invest a lot more on capacity building, both of our clients as well as of consultants in the different countries. And finally, at least to close my intervention, is thinking ahead. I think what we've learned in this whole process will change the way we operate in the future. A lot of good learning has taken place out of this. For instance, with the virtual visits, I think one change that I see in the future is that it will be a lot less of checking the box process that we have to visit certain projects every so many months, but a lot more focus on putting more resources where the risks are, taking into consideration the stage of the project and the current risks that they're facing. So we might emerge to a situation that in a project A, we have a lot more field presential visits, and on project B, no presential visits. I think the future will bring that. We've also learned a lot on what we need to do for enhancing the quality of virtual consultation. I'll leave with just a few thoughts. Planning preparation is fundamental. We've also learned that it hasn't been efficient to do like long virtual missions with 8-hour meetings. So now we do shorter, more focused meetings. So we do like a 4-hour meeting on resettlement, and the next day we do a 4-hour meeting on something else, and next week. So that's another learning that's taking place. So I end here on the benefit of time, and I'm glad to engage and respond to any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I think that was really useful. I think there's some key points coming out on there, which I'll draw into the kind of the poll questions that came up. So when we had the responses up, there was a very clear positive response. 68% responded that they would conduct the site visits, but use local consultants to support. I think that ties in really well with what Gabrielle and Anton have both said, that their banks and policies have kind of introduced over the last year, is that using local consultants, but with an international consultant as their support and potentially capacity building, is a proactive and positive way to take forward these site visits. And I think perhaps that might be an approach that is continued on post-COVID. I think the other point, which is quite important, is actually talking to the projects and the people that you're visiting, whether it's the communities or other stakeholders, before you conduct the virtual site visit. So you're not dictating to them, but you're actually having an open communication with how perhaps they want to conduct the virtual site visits. Because as Gabrielle mentioned, they might have different technologies, they might have different ideas. And I think we find, particularly in developing countries, they have their own ways of communication, which we need to be open to. I think for me as a consultant, I'm quite interested in where the future is on site visits and how they will be conducted, whether that's physically or virtually. So for myself, I do a lot of monitoring visits for lenders. That includes initial site visits, pre-financial close, but also construction and operational monitoring. So obviously for construction monitoring, particularly on large scale infrastructure, or I guess category A projects where there is a significant number of workers, I think the physical site visit will never be replaced, because the detail you get from drone and photographs and even, I guess, information from the site is never going to give you that feeling that you get, or that information that you can get from walking around the site and actually visibly seeing what is happening on the ground. I think what we have noticed from the consultancy side is, particularly in the last few months, increased pressure from, I guess, the project developers or the borrowers in our scope and our contracted work to actually reduce down the number of physical site visits that we do as part of our monitoring for the banks. So this is, it's a change. So these companies, organizations have seen that virtual site visits work, and they can also see the business case, the time cost savings that they have not having a team of people visiting their site for a few days. They're also not paying for our travel and fees. Obviously, from an environmental perspective, the sustainability benefits from the reducing the amount of international travel. So I think if I pass it back to you, Gabrielle, as an investor, how do you see that changing in the future, or would you still see a requirement for physical site visits?
No, I definitely see it as a requirement for physical visits. I don't think that it's one or the other. I think it's going to be both. I think as you said, there are complexities, there are issues that really demand face-to-face, boots on the ground. And I think that will never change. But the way I like to see it, a lot of people have asked the question, is there like less field visits or more? No, I think, as I said, it's not one or the other, it's both. What we have learned, I like to look at the upside. What we have learned is that we can do a lot more on the virtual space than what we are challenging us to do in the past. And that's one of the benefits of being forced to deal with adversity. We're forced to deal with the situation and we adapted. And what we have learned is this, we can do a lot this way. So when we move ahead in the future to some normal stage in which we can resume travel, we can resume visits, I don't think anything really fully substitutes for that, because it's not only the due diligence or the supervision, it's the trust that you build with the local clients, with local communities, with local contacts, and that's really important. It's part of our business. So it's not only the E&S work, but the ability to do so many things virtually and to do so many things well virtually, I think that's a gain to our business, it's a gain to this market, and will allow us, for instance, to complement, to fill in voids between site visits, or to, as I said before, be able to direct more resources, or like travel resources to certain projects that demand more, and then cover other projects that either, for instance, that have completed the main construction stage. If you're talking about a infrastructure project where the risks are not the same anymore when you start the tail end or you start the repayment period. The risks are not the operation phase. Many times the risk is not as high as they were doing construction. So perhaps you can do this shift. No, I will focus more on operational phases with virtual visits, and then I'll have more resources to dedicate to the projects that require and are at a high risk state. So in summary, I think it's not one or the other, it's both, and I see what we've learned with our virtual space as a long-lasting benefit to all of us.
Yeah, okay, sure. So I think maybe we can conclude from that in terms of the business case is that, over the last year, there's a lot of very good practice that's been developed in terms of virtual site visits. A lot of the development banks particularly have specific guidelines on how to conduct those virtual site visits. So it's a practice that will continue, and perhaps it should continue because there are definite benefits of using it. But I think individually on a project, the project team, the project financiers need to decide maybe stage by stage as to how they approach the physical or the virtual site visits.
Yep. I think that's a very, very good summary. And also a little bit of a change of the nature of the work. I think we'll be moving ahead also a lot more emphasis on continue to build in local capacity, both with clients, but with the technical and the consulting community in these countries as well. So I think, you just summarized it really beautifully.
Okay, great. I think we are going to pass over to Anna Marie, who's going to talk us through some of the community aspects.
And while she's transitioning, I'm going to throw up another poll in transition. So thank you to Elizabeth and Gabriel for your wonderful contributions. It's been very, very helpful. Let's launch a poll here and see where your thoughts are on the topic. So the question to be responded to is the following. A construction project that you are monitoring employees from the local community. COVID-19 cases are on the rise and health services cannot cope. Do you, and we're wanting you to pick one of these, do you test all of the workers and send anyone home that is infected? Do you accommodate community workers on the site? Do you buy tests for the entire community? Do you pause construction? Or none of the above? So again, a construction project that you're monitoring employees from the local community, and COVID-19 cases in that region are on the rise and the health services cannot cope. which of these options is the best plan for you to do. Take a few more moments of collecting the responses. All right, and I'll be closing in 5 seconds, so if you haven't voted, vote now. All right, I have closed, so let's share what we've found. So 28% of the respondents say that that we should be testing all of the workers and sending home anyone that is infected. Just under that, 21% say that we should accommodate the community workers that are on the site. 8% say that we should buy tests for the entire community. In the highest rating, 38% said that we should pause construction. And finally, 5% say none of the above. So with that, I will hide the poll and pass the baton to Miss Anna Maria. And I'm just going to check one thing as I do. On a wing and a prayer, we have been frantically working throughout the presentation thus far to connect our colleague who is going to be speaking with Anna Maria to be able to get online. She's been having technical difficulties. And Anna Maria, I'm sorry to say, despite about 16 different efforts, we cannot get her on. So
I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
You are here.
Wonderful.
Blessings to you. You just saved the day. So have fun, the two of you, and I'm going to breathe a lot easier on my end. Thanks.
Zainabu, I'm so happy to do this. So
I'm even happier that I finally managed to connect.
So, hello, everyone. So let's think about that poll that just happened. And you could see there was a big range in responses. So it's not straightforward, is it? It's about going through a bit of a rapid risk in your mind as to what is the best, or at least the least worst answer to come up with. And here I want to point to quite a handy guidance that Gabrielle's team has worked on. It's a guidance on infrastructure projects under COVID-19. And I think it mentions something like you have to look at 3 aspects of risk. And the one is the management capacity, and the other is the project risk, and the other is the context risk to come up with a decision. Now, a social specialist, in doing such a rapid risk assessment, you put on your glasses, your special glasses that give you these magic superpowers to do a context review in order to see vulnerability. So what do we mean by vulnerability or community vulnerability? It's looking at how exposed people are. It's looking at how sensitive they are to the risk, and the capacity to cope. Now, the thing is that these superpowers don't work remotely. And there's our dilemma. In order to get people to speak openly about issues, you need to be with them, build an environment of trust, and use methods of open inquiry. So it's about trying to go under the surface, making things that are usually invisible visible. So it's impossible to do virtual social assessment. And there's the dilemma that we face. You don't want to be adding to the vulnerability because of your physical presence in the area. And this is something that that applies whether you're using a local consultant or not. In the social world, there already, even pre-COVID, there was a model of working with local consultants and international consultants. So sending in a local consultant doesn't necessarily mean that you're not contributing to vulnerability. So Zainabu, I'm interested to hear how you have in your business you've been adapting to this.
Yes, Anna Maria, thank you. So I want to touch upon a couple of things. You've made a very strong statement there with the you can't do social assessment remotely. But I'm going to first answer the question on how we've adapted in terms of our business, ESG Africa. So the way we set up our model of working, we're first of all local. We are based in Senegal, and so the way we set up ourselves was really to have partners a little bit all over Africa. So whether it's East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, and North Africa. And that's how our business model is set. So it made it very easy during COVID for us to be able to respond depending on where our clients were. Now, in terms of what you just said, it's impossible to do a social assessment remotely. I would tell you that it depends. It depends at what stage are you in the project. It's are you looking at an ESIA level where you need the social impact assessment to be done? Are you looking at a RAP, to international standard? Are you what kind of level of trust have you already built in that community? Are you at the project implementation stage, and which in that kind of environment, then you'll be in a different situation. Whether you have that trust built, whether you have the local capacity, and also your willingness, I would say, us in terms of all together having that international level, let's say, standard or knowledge, willing to share with the local consultant and build that capacity as well. So I can come back maybe to some examples a little bit in terms of, let me just give you an example actually. For one of my clients, Azura company, Azura power plant. So what happened was immediately during COVID, and remember, in most places in Africa, there was not like a total confinement. So there might have been some curfews, there might have been some restriction, and some orders, for instance, to not have big groups. You had to limit it to 10. So what happened was really immediately redesigning the stakeholder engagement and realizing also that there wasn't a real community emergency or stakeholder emergency preparedness and response to COVID or to any other thing, because we took for granted that we'll always have the ability to go towards our stakeholders. We didn't imagine a situation where we wouldn't be. So immediately, thank God, we had the phone numbers of our key stakeholders. So, and I've heard somebody talk about, adapting to technology, and effectively, WhatsApp was one of the ones that was the technology of choice to create groups and start communicating. And what we found out was on the women's side, there was a gender issue there that most women did not have in the community smartphones. So it was much more difficult to create WhatsApp group with the women. And we had to figure out other ways to connect with them individually or by adding a certain number of people to a call, which was limited to 8. So I'm going to stop there and maybe just pass it back to you, and you can provide your perspective.
Thanks, Zainabu. So I want to pick up on one word that you said. It resonated with me a bit. And you were saying it depends. And and you mentioned the word trust. So I think you've got a good point there, because if there's a trusting environment between the community and the project, and you're at the monitoring. Now I'm thinking about monitoring. I don't know if this would work so much at due diligence. Then you could work with the community liaison officer to, contact a few members of the village committee by WhatsApp, or you could. We have one client that bought advertising time on the radio in order to send out announcements. And you can also run, SMS surveys. That's in a high trust environment. I want to try share my screen here to show you an example of. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is on a Ugandan project, a community drive-through. And what that is basically a vehicle with, can you see the large speaker, going through the communities and making announcements that inviting people to meet in small groups of no more than 4 people at a time. Yeah, so that's one innovation that has come out of COVID. Let me unshare again. Okay. Okay, so that raises a question. How do you know upfront whether this is a high trust environment? I certainly wouldn't trust the grievances that are registered in the grievance mechanism, nor would I trust Anisha to conclude whether there's social acceptance or not. And what also just what came into mind was, I don't know if you listen to the young poet in the Biden inauguration, and there was a line in her poem that says, we learnt that quiet isn't always peace. So having ways of really understanding whether, who can actually try and work with you to identify which is the best mechanism to reach out to people. You've mentioned some that where you worked, the woman was a hard to reach group because they weren't on WhatsApp.
Yeah, but we still managed to reach them. So, and I think this is what COVID did. So you had 2 options. Either you were going to lock yourself out and say, well, it's difficult and we're not going to have any stakeholder engagement during this period, would have been a disaster. Or find ways to make it happen. Use whatever resources you had. And this was a moment to show the resilience of any company right there, right? Because they had to not only survive themselves as a business, but make sure also they didn't jeopardize their relationship or whatever relationship they have at a certain level to not impact it negatively. And an example, if for instance, looking at the operation phase, and I'm coming back to the same company, Azura, making sure that even if you had some community development, objectives, and you had agreed commitments, you have agreed with the community, that even COVID didn't stop them from making those happen, right? And what it did, this constant engagement with the community, even during COVID, is really being there for them in difficult times. I mean, what it did in terms of building trust and just goodwill was incredible, right? And I think that a lot of companies kind of just went, well, we don't know, we can't go see them, and maybe haven't tried enough. And a lot did, and a lot came up with also innovation. But in all of these things, and I think when I mentioned earlier that it depends and also of our willingness to share knowledge. I'm going to give you an example on an IFC ESDD where a local consultant was used, and I was asked to basically, can I just support that local consultant to ensure that they undertake this ESDD in compliance with IFC performance standards. Now, it's just a lot of, because they have some of the technical knowledge and probably most of it, right? So the what we need to bring is really more on maybe, the preparation on what kind of question to ask, how far to dig in terms of the analysis, triangulation of data, being able to write in a certain way that, the lenders expect as well. So this just meant some support that I was able to do remotely. And I think all of us can do this. And I think all of us need to start doing more of this to make our craft sustainable and not always be, the international consultant parachuting over to kind of save the day. We have to build this capacity over time because that's the only way we're going to be sustainable and be ready to fight the next wave of COVID or the next wave of whatever we don't know yet that will happen. So it comes back to really the importance of us as a community building local capacity. Back over to you.
No, I really like that. So you've stressed the opportunities that lie in working on building capacity with local consultants. What we found we've been spending more time on is building capacity of the project teams, so the people that have responsibility on the project for social performance. And so it's not just training but coaching, and to the actually last year we spent some time working on a 360-degree assessment tool, like for competency development for people on site, and also looking at their competencies, but also technical proficiencies around their role, and then supporting them through very coaching type of trusting sessions where they look at how they want to develop. So I want to share your screen because I'd like to. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so this is just to show the competency assessment tool looked at three broad categories of competencies: empathy and coping with complexity and accountability, and then plus the technical proficiency. And yeah, so this is this was tried just this year on a livelihoods restoration, and, with some good results, I hope. Let me switch back. Senabu, on the relying, working with local with local partners and working with local consultants. It's quite it's a different way of working, but it sounds like you were already set up for it.
Yes, because when I created ESG Africa, for me, it was an imperative, that we need to get to a stage where we have the capacity locally. I'm, as you know, I'm from Africa, so I'm from Senegal, where the company is based here. We're based in the UK and here in Senegal. So and for me, there was no other way but to build the local capacity if we wanted to move forward. And we all have this ambition, right? We want to green Africa. We want to make it better. That's why we're in this job that we are in, right? And to do that, we have to develop the local capacity to be able to do it. So it's also cheaper for the client, right? And for everybody at the end of the day, when we can take away some of the flight costs, the hotel costs, and start working remotely. Because I think if one thing we learned from this pandemic is this ability to use remote due diligence. Has Antoine mentioned earlier the example. I've also worked with Miga to do a due diligence remotely using drones, to use that collaboration and enhance that collaboration. Has a way of going forward. I think under no condition should we go back to what it was before. We need to create a new paradigm in terms of how we work together, local mixed with international, and purposefully build the capacity going forward to level the playing field. I think that's the only way we're going to be successful in what we do in this class.
fully agree. So I'm just conscious of time, and I wanted to cover one more thing on this capacity that that we worked on last year, and that was thinking about on the lender side. So specifically the staff that are responsible for working on the screening in preparation for the due diligence. Okay, and what we were finding, and this is pre-COVID, so often as a result of screening, there's an environmental and social generalist that gets sent to do the due diligence. And what this means is a lot of blind spots. So if things go pear-shaped on the social front, then the specialists are in. So what we do was develop a tool that would really help the person doing screening have a lot more data on what were the potential social and human rights contextual issues, so that they would know if they would need to, which specialists were already involved in the due diligence. So this was the result of this. Let me pull it up. It's not on the screen, or is it, Tanya? Do I need to show my screen?
Your screen is shown, so just progress to the next slide, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, so so this was something else that had magical superpowers called Inga. So
it's not there yet, dear. We need to, I think, still shift a slide.
Oh, the superpowers are not working. It
The
should be there.
I'm seeing SP grow. There it is.
Hello. Okay, so this is an automatic report generator for countries on social and human rights context. So as I mentioned, this was addressing an issue that was happening pre-COVID. But what is happening now is that it's much more important to know early on, for example, are there Indigenous peoples at risk from any engagement activity? Does the context already have a history of gender-based violence, which could be exacerbated because you have unemployed spouses stuck at home? Is there already a prevalence of forced labor or child labor, which could grow if schools are shut? Or is the health system, is it strong or weak? So I wanted to leave you with that, and you can contact me if you'd like to find out more.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, thank you both so very much. Was there something you wanted to add there, ma'am?
No, I'm fine. I'm very conscious of time. I don't. Sainabu, would you like to add anything?
Just to reinforce one point, Anna Marie, in terms of this importance of organizational capacity, and I know lenders put that a lot in the action plan in terms of having a very competent, solid environmental health and safety team and social team. And this is exactly why it's so important, because if you look at it, the companies that had that, were much more able to be nimble, react to the pandemic, and not rely on external support than those that didn't have it or were in the process of getting it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, ladies. And I'm so excited that Sainabu was able to join us. You have made my day, ma'am. I'm very, very thankful. So as we transition into the Q&A section of our presentation, we have one more poll. So I'm going to launch that third poll. And as I do, we will read it aloud and keep on moving. So I would like for you to select 3 things from the following list that would contribute to the biggest improvement in E&S performance post-COVID. So your options are more use of drones for monitoring, separate out monitoring requirements for E and for S, greater internal capacity for ENS within the project, greater capacity for assessors in the host country of the project, or more frequent monitoring by investors or lenders. So again, what are the three things that would contribute to the biggest improvement in ENS performance in this post-COVID world we are preparing for? A few seconds left. All right, I'm closing the presentation vote, and now let's share some results. All right, so we have, for more use of drones for monitoring, 42%. Separating out monitoring requirements for E and for S, 27%. Greater internal capacity for ENS within the project, a very high 78%. More frequent monitoring by investment and lenders was 33%. And community-based monitoring, again, a very high 77%. So with that data in mind, I'm going to invite the entire panel to join us on camera and to be led in a closing Q&A session with Ariel taking the lead of facilitation.
Thank you, Tanya. First of all, I want to thank the panelists for very interesting conversations, and also the participants for the diverse and numerous questions they send us during the pre and during this event. Unfortunately, I want to say that we will not have enough time to answer all these questions. So we have selected a few, which I think pretty much summarize the pool, the diverse pool of questions that we have received. There's a lot of concerns in the participants about accessibility to different stakeholders. And one of the questions talks about inclusiveness. This comes from the Caribbean. The question is, we have utilized virtual public engagement sessions and advertised through newspapers, leaflets, drops, and posters, but there are still concerns about inclusiveness. And we'd love to hear your experiences. Do you want, Ana Maria, do you want to start with this, addressing this question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question? I couldn't hear it. Thank you.
Yes, of course. The question is, comes from the Caribbean, and they have been finding ways to overcome COVID limitations in terms of engagement with the public through, either virtual public engagement or through advertised newspapers and leaflets, but they are still concerned about full inclusiveness of these approaches.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that was very prevalent before COVID, and now we just see it being heightened. And I think here it's really about being creative. It's about knowing who cannot be reached through virtual methods, and which is the best way to reach them, because this happens everywhere. I mean, we're involved in a project in the Netherlands where you would think that a lot of people are online, but actually it's social housing with migrants and who don't speak Dutch. So it's about understanding who represents them, who is working with them, whether it's social welfare, and it's understanding who are the gatekeepers, and which is the best way to communicate. It can be done.
And this is, of course, is related to another question, which talk about accessibility to technology. You know, how different sectors within the stakeholder, within the community, can really access technology that will allow them to express themselves and provide inputs to, you know, your monitoring efforts or your due diligence efforts. There was a question that Gabriel, I think, partially answered, but I would like for him to expand a little bit more. And I think Elizabeth also mentioned this before, how if COVID have pushed business to reduce costs, and in terms of site visits and number of site visits and other associated costs with the due diligence or monitoring. And you, Gabriel, mentioned that in reality, at least from your end, you have seen the need for continuing both the prior process that you had, but also taking advantage of the lessons learned during COVID. And if you would like to expand a little bit more on that, because it affects not only social but environmental aspects as well.
No, I don't think so. I'll go straight to the answer. No, I actually think that that businesses will invest more, and I think we shouldn't look at this as cost. If we take just as very narrow view and say, are we going to do more visits or use more clients, more consultants to do visits? Yeah, in certain cases you may argue that, but I think the pandemic, Ariel, perhaps is the second global challenge facing humanity. We had one, climate change. We have one, climate change, but many around the globe believe it, they know they exist, but they have not experienced the impacts yet, right? So it's hard to relate. What the COVID does, and thus my analogy between COVID and climate change, being the second global challenge, it brings challenges to our homes, to our daily lives, to our work, to economies, to our companies. It grounded what the true impact of a global challenge may be. And climate change is even greater than that. So I think what I see is that companies have learned a lot, businesses have learned a lot, and have learned that they have to do more. That's what I hear from my clients. They have learned, they know there are winners and losers in this process. Some companies came out very well, depending on their line of business. Some companies lost a lot, depending on their line of business. But they all agreed on one thing: we are prepared for risks that had a medium probability of occurrence and medium impact. That's what companies prepare themselves for. And what I see now is that companies also want to be prepared for risks that have a lower probability of occurrence, but very, very high impact. So I think the dynamic is going to change. And I think actually we may be more wise or wiser on where we allocated our resources. Really, leaving that processes that many companies and banks have of checking the box and really focusing on putting the resources where they're most needed as a consequence of the potential risks and opportunities that those projects present. I'll stop here on a bit of a time, but just going back to the previous question, I fully agree with Ana Maria. Inclusiveness has always been an issue, and it's not an issue derived from virtual or not. So I think what we have learned is this process, and just reinforce something we knew before. Consultation and engagement cannot be just a series of photographs, 3 or 4 slide shots when you're appraising a project. It needs to be a movie. It needs to be a continuous process that starts with the due diligence and continues. And that's the really only way to promote more inclusiveness. If you have just 1 or 2 or 3 data points, you're gonna miss something. But if you have a continuous of data points, the chances are that you capture more. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ariel, can I come in, please? I just wanted to, is that okay?
Yes, of course. Yes, yes.
Okay. So I wanted to reinforce what Gabriel said, because it's really important, and just kind of touch upon the fact that really this was an opportunity for a lot of clients to come closer to the community. the showing that we're in it together aspect. And what it made also realize, and I keep coming back to this client, Azura, was that, when you have like 45% of your employees that are part of the community, you cannot not react to COVID-19, right? Because if your employees are sick, your plant is also going to suffer. Let's face it. How are you going to run your plant if people are contaminating? So going out in the community now, that you see that the borders is very porous. There's no border between your communities and outside, and vice versa, particularly when they're not in a lockdown situation, which means every day your communities are going out, right? Going home, taking the bus, and then coming back every day. So all of a sudden, when we talk about environmental health and safety, the health now has a whole different meaning about how we're going to look at it going forward. The last thing I wanted to mention on what Anna Maria's response, I totally agree that inclusion has always been an issue, but also I think this is also the time to include in what we're doing the communities in terms of supporting us, when we're looking at finding ways of getting information out and doing it in a collaborative way. And last but not least, Gabrielle, when you mentioned about, engagement is supposed to be continuous, yes, but this is why it's so important to have that capacity at the client level so the client can continue the engagement. So that is something that we just need to even push more now, because really it's continuous and the client needs to have that ability and the capacity to engage with the community and build relationship and trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Senabu. I guess I could pose the similar question to both Anton and to Elizabeth that I posed to Gabrielle, particularly in your case, Anton, in your case, Elizabeth, because of your working experience as a consultant, and in your case, Anton, because you recently participated in the refinement of the FMO sustainable processes. I wonder if you have included, the lessons learned from COVID in those processes.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, I think we all hope that the situation is indeed temporary and ending, but probably not going back to exactly the same situation as before. And for me, as a map man, I was a map man. I was also met, but map man. I was kind of disappointed that the answers on the previous question was that more use of drones was only coming out third. Because I think, as we also I heard from that consultant, Terra Consulting, who did those drone footage, they say this is only the beginning. And then they're looking at, you can do more with actually land surveying and mapping and looking at the different types of drones, like looking at the hydrology or urban planning or whatever. So that is something I very much look forward to further developing.
I think I have to agree with Anton. I think the use of drones for me is the positive thing that's come out of virtual site visits, particularly on large kind of infrastructure projects. For example, the wind farm that Anton showed us, or even projects with large stretches of road and rail, just to be able to get that visual kind of perspective of the whole projects across a large area has been really quite valuable. I think there's been different levels of drone footage from various different projects. Some is very good and some is a bit patchy, but I think every single project that I've worked on and done a virtual site visit for, I think every single one has been able to provide drone footage regardless of the location. So it's obviously a technology and a mechanism that the projects can use globally, so it doesn't seem restrictive. And so, yeah, I think continuing on with that, as a sort of key part of site visits would be beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sustainable again. Sorry, can I add something just quickly on the drone?
Yes,
One other aspect that it can be very useful. In one of the projects I was working on with MEGA, what it helped is on the biodiversity. So you have sometimes classification of certain forest has, a classified forest, right? And sometimes that even the term classified forest can get a lot of biodiversity specialists very excited about it, right? And it was great to be able with a drone to really oversee that forest and look at the further surrounding, and then being able to go over it with a very experimented Sally, hopefully a lot of you know her, in in terms of biodiversity specialist, and her going over it and going, okay, yeah, I see why this is, we might need to look at this differently, ask other questions. So I thought it was a great collaboration. So there's also aspect of biodiversity that's where it can play as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. We have reached the end of our webinar, unfortunately, because these questions are fascinating. I do highly recommend to all the participants that remain connected with IAIA, with our webinars and other activities. Charles provided his links to his very interesting surveys. I also recommend digging into that. And of course, all of us are available to respond to questions in the future if you have our emails. But I would like to thank the participants once again, the panelists, and I give you the baton back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you all so very much. Somebody is getting an exciting phone call, so it might be a good idea for all of the panelists to mute as I do just one final quick screen sharing before we part. So on behalf of the staff at IAIA headquarters, the board and the team, I really want to extend our appreciation for all of the work that has been done to get to this place, the arrangements that have gone into organizing a group of 8 professionals on the same day and at the same time, as well as to each of you who have been in attendance. It is a sacrifice of time to be able to make the choice to dedicate time to this continuing learning and to the investment of looking forward as to the impact that IAIA can be a part of, and that the impact assessment world needs to face. So thank you for your attendance and participation. Please continue the discussion on social media. Keep the buzz going. Share with your friends that they'll be able to access the video within 48 hours. You'll get a link and then you can pass it along to whoever you'd like to. And finally, as I close out the presentation here today, you will immediately get a survey. It is very, very short, so please take a few moments just to fill that out, give us some feedback, and we would appreciate it very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you, and take care, be safe, and be well. Bye-bye.